We begin today the Gemara on Daf Nun Hey Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom of the Amid. Masiv Rami Bar Chama. So we're in the middle of an Inyan here. The Gemara is discussing the din of the Mishnah that said that if a person becomes a Mitzayra during the days of his Nazirus, so it interrupts the count of his Nazirus, and then when he's done with the Tzaras, so then he resumes counting his Nazirus. He doesn't have to start again from scratch, but he just resumes where he was holding. That was a din of the Mishnah. On that, Rav Chisda explained that really, while you're a Mitzayra, you could continue counting those days for your Naziris. The only reason the Mishnah said that you have to interrupt your Naziris and then resume after you finish with your Tzaras is technically because you need 30 days to have of your hair growth to be able to cut the hair at the conclusion of your Naziris. And when you conclude your Tzaras, you cut your hair. So if you don't have, after that, 30 days to cut your hair for the Nazirus, so then you're going to have to count those 30 days. So if you had exactly 30 days left over, so you can't use the days of your Tzaras for the days of your Naziris, because then it's going to come out, you're going to be left with less than 30 days of hair growth to cut your hair. But if you have a long Naziris, let's say it was 100 days, 200 days, or however long it was, and the days of your Tzaras, when you're done with that, you still have 30 days left to count from your Naziris, then there's no problem. You could include the days of your Tzaras as part of the days of your Naziris, because you anyways have 30 days left over to continue going. So you'll have enough here to be able to cut at the conclusion of your Naziris. That was the Chiddush of Rav Chisda. So the Gemara here is going to ask a few questions on Rav Chisda and prove that we see that this is not so. So the Gemara Masav Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asked the Shaila from the following Mishnah that's later here in the Masechta. Nazir Shahaya Tamei B'Safik. What happens with a Nazir that became Tamei during his Nazirus? On the first day of his Naziris, he took upon himself Naziris 30 days, right? Minimum Naziris is 30 days. Then on the first day of his Naziris, he becomes Tomei, but it's a Safik Tomei. So it's not clear now what he's doing. Is he continuing his regular Naziris, Betara, or does he have to now take care of the fact that he became Tomei? And then besides this, there's another doubt of something that happened there. Umuchlit B'Safik. He may be a Mitzayra. A Mitzayra Muchlit is a Mitzayra that was confirmed to be a Mitzayra. He also may be a Mitzayra, but that's also a doubt. It's not clear if he's a Mitzayra or not. Okay, the Rishonim discuss. We'll see this is later also in the Gemara. How exactly does this happen that this person becomes a Safik Mitzayra? Either he is or he isn't. So one of the ways to explain it is that the Kayan determined that someone is a Mitzayra, but now it became a Safik who that individual is. Was it him? Was it someone else? Or a situation where you have a Kayan that confirmed someone to be a Mitzayra, but now the Safik is about the Kayan himself. Only a Kayan, which is a Zachar, could confirm someone as a Mitzayra. What happens if that Kayan is a Safik, if he's a Zachar or a Nekeva? That's a Tumtum, an individual where you don't even know if he's able to confirm you as a Mitzayra. It's another situation where it could be a Safik. But the point over here is, so now this person finds himself in a situation where there's a Safik, if he's a Mitzayra or not, Safik if he got Tomei or not, and this is all during the time when he's a Nazir. Okay, so now what really happens over here? 1 second. So what happens over here is, this is an individual that has to have taglachas, so he has to cut his hair 4 times. Why 4 times? Because a Mitzayra that has to cut his hair twice. That's how it works with a Mitzayra. When a Mitzayra is finished with his Tzaras, he comes in from being outside the Machna. So right in the beginning, he comes in and he cuts his hair, and there's 2 birds that he brings as a carbon. That's the beginning. Then he has to count 7 days. And then again on the 8th day, he has to cut his hair again, and then on the 8th day he brings karbanis again. So for the fact that he may be a Mitzayra, he has to cut his hair twice. Then for the fact that he may be a Nazir Tamei, when he concludes he also has to be Matayr himself from that Tumah, then he has to cut his hair and bring karbanis for that. So for the Nazir Tumah, he has to cut his hair. And then, for just being a Nazir, when you conclude your Naziris, you also have to cut your hair at the conclusion of the Naziris. So he has to cut his hair 4 times. Now the problem is, since we don't know whether he's actually Tamei or whether he's actually a Mitzayra or not, he's not allowed to cut his hair during his days of a Naziris. While you're a Nazir, there's an Isra to cut your hair. So what is this person going to do? How is he going to cut his hair for the Sfeikis that he has? A Mitzayra pushes off the Isra to cut your hair during your Naziris. Right? That if you were actually Tameh, you have to cut your hair in order to restart, that is, your Naziris. But if you're not Tameh, you're not a Mitzayra, you're not allowed to cut your hair. So the only option this person has is he's going to have to keep the days of his Nazir. He's going to have to keep 30 days and then cut his hair once for being a Mitzayre. Keep another full 30 days and then cut his hair again. Then, correct. He has to keep full 30 days of his Nazirus in case he's actually a Nazir and he's not a Mitzayre and he's not Tomei, and only then will he be allowed to cut his hair the first time. And then he's going to have to do the same. He has to count another 30 days and then cut his hair a second time. Right? But again, every time he's going to have to cut his hair, he's going to have to count 30 days in order to keep the time of his Nazirus, so that he shouldn't maybe be doing a Isser of cutting his hair during his Nazirus. Okay, so therefore the Mishnah there spells out and says as follows. So this individual could only come to eat kachim la'acha shishim yom, after 60 days. Now what's stopping this person of eating kachim is the fact that he may be a mitzayra, which means that he could only conclude his tzaras, cut his hair once and cut his hair a second time, and then bring the karbanis that he needs to for the tzaras after 60 days. Okay, so when he cuts his hair the first time, it's actually a suffix. When he's cutting his hair, he may be cutting his hair because he was a mitzayra. He may be cutting his hair because he was tameh. He may be cutting his hair because he's a nazir, because he's concluding his naziris. And the truth is, this person has a problem also with the karbanis he has to bring, which is a separate discussion. We're not going to get into that now. Because every time you have to conclude your tzaras or conclude your naziris, so there's different karbanis that are brought. It's not always the same karbanis. So he's going to have to figure out exactly which karbanis he brings. But over here, once he's concluded with his naziris, once he's concluded with his tzaras, he's able to go and eat kachim. Okay, so therefore he cuts his hair once, cuts his hair a second time. So those 2 times are going to be considered for the conclusion of his tzaras. As I mentioned, you have to cut your hair twice for that. And once he's done with that, he can eat kachim. And then, but in order for him to be completely done with his nazirus, to be allowed now to go ahead and drink wine, or to become Tomei Temesim, that's only lachamei v'esrim yom. He's going to have to wait another 60 days. It's only after 120 days. Right? So what's the total of 120 days? So as I mentioned, this person has to cut his hair 4 times. And each time he has to cut his hair, he has to wait 30 days because maybe he's still a nazir and he's not allowed to cut his hair within that period of 30 days. So he has to wait 30 days times 4, which is 120 days. So after he cuts his hair the first 2 times for the tzaras, so now he has to cut his hair again. Maybe he was a nazir tameh. Then he has to wait another 30 days for the nazir tara, that just for the regular naziris. And that comes to the total of 120 days, and only then will he be finished with his naziris. That's what it says in the Mishnah.
But a person not a suffix. Tzaras, he's a suffix nazir, but he has to wait. You mean when he's skiroi?
Suffix tzaras, we're talking about it. Muchlit b'suffix. That's the case we're talking about. This person is a suffix mitzayda.
Well, because he's skiroi?
No, not. I mentioned before 2 options of how that could happen. Either because he's confused with another person. This person is a suffix mitzayda, not the days that he's locked up because we don't know if he's a nazir. A suffix, whether he was confirmed to be a mitzayda or not. That's what we're talking about here. Now on this we learned in the Braise that the exact same halacha that this Mishnah says will also apply in a case where a person accepts upon himself a longer naziris. So here, this Mishnah describes this when a person accepted upon himself the minimum naziris of 30 days. Now, but so the Braise says, but this is all true, that I'll have to wait 120 days b'naziris muetes, by the minimum naziris of 30 days. If he took upon himself to be a nazir for a year, so now exact same halacha the Mishnah said, but not every time he cuts his hair he's going to have to wait a year. That's what the Braisa says. So now he'll only be allowed to eat kachim after 2 years. So he cuts his hair the first time, the second time. So we'll count that for the times that he was a mitzayre. Possibly the hair that's being cut is for the 2 times that has to be cut for being a mitzayre. Right? It's a suffix. Could be he's cutting his hair because he's concluding his naziris. Could be it's being cut for the fact that he was a mitzayre. But he has to wait a full year. Because within that year, he may be a regular nazir and he's not allowed to cut his hair for his tzaras. We don't know that he's a mitzayre. So he has to wait 2 years for that. And then, but he'll only have the full conclusion of his naziris to be able to drink wine and become Tomei Temesim, lacha arba shanim. Only after 4 years. He's going to have to wait another 2 years to cut his hair twice again. Once for the fact that he might be a Tomei Nazir, and then again, wait another year for the fact that he's a regular nazir that has to wait a year. Okay, so we have over here this braise that says that this halacha of the Mishnah applies not only by the minimum naziris of 30 days, but it also applies when a person took upon himself a longer naziris, a naziris of a year. Now, here comes the question of what Rav Chisda said. Again, what did Rav Chisda say? That really, during the time that you're a Mitzayda, you could count those days for your naziris. The only reason it said in our Mishnah that you can't is because of a technicality. If he does not have 30 days at the end to have enough hair that grows to be able to cut the hair. But if so, if you're going to say like Rav Chisda said, that those days of his tzaras will be counted for the days of his naziros. If so, in this braisa, where we're speaking about a person that took upon himself the days of naziros, a full year, 365 days, it's a long naziros. If so, to sagilei b'shalashana v'shloishim yaim. For this person, why should he have to wait 4 years? It should be enough for him to wait 3 years and then 30 days for his naziros. Because over here, this individual could use the days of his tzaras to be counted for the days of his naziros. Right? So therefore, yet true, he's going to have to wait 3 years, 1 year, in order to be able to cut the hair the first time for the tzaras. Okay, he has to wait that full year because possibly he's not a mitzayda, so he can't cut his hair in the middle of his naziris. He has to wait a year for that. Then he has to wait a second year for the second time that he has to cut his hair for the tzaras, because he can't. Otherwise, he can't cut. And then he's going to have to wait yet another year for the time that he may have been a Nazir Tameh. But for this, that if all of this is not true, if he's not a Mitzayra and he's not a Nazir Tameh, but he was just a Nazir, so he already waited long enough. I could count the days of Tzaras for the days of his Naziros. Elamai, the only thing is, he needs 30 days of the growth of the hair to be able to conclude his Naziris. Okay, so give him 30 days for that, and then he should be able to conclude his Naziris. Why does he have to wait another full year for him to be able to conclude his Naziris of the regular Naziris of Tara? So 3 years and 30 days should be enough if I am including the days of the Tzaras to be counted towards his Naziris. That's one question on Rav Chisda. The Gemara asks another question. Ravashi asked from the following brayse that spells out the source of this entire halacha regarding a nazir that became a mitzayda. So the Ravashi said, the brayse says that I would think only times when a person becomes tameh, that means he became tameh from a mace, that those days do not count for the days of your naziris. How do you know that days that a person was confirmed to be a mitzayda, that they don't count for your naziris either? So the Braisa says, Vidinu, it's logical to compare a mitzayda to a person that became tummy to a mace. Why? You made tummy. If a person becomes tummy to a mace during his naziris, what's the halacha megaleach? You're going to have to cut your hair, or maybe carbon, and you have to bring a carbon for that, and then you start your naziris all over again. When a person is a mitzayda, the same thing happens. Megaleach, when you conclude your tzaras, you also have to cut your hair. You actually cut your hair twice, or maybe carbon, and you bring carbonates for that as well. So I see that they're the same. So you made tumasai ein loy. Just like the days that you're tameh to a mace during your naziris, it doesn't count for the days of your naziris. Af yemei chalute ein loy. So to the days that you're a mitzayda during your naziris also are not part of the count. That's the comparison. The Braisa continues and says, not necessarily could we compare them. Because when I see that the days of your tumah don't count towards your naziris, there we know the Torah was much more stringent. Not only don't those days count, but it actually nullifies any previous days that you kept. You have to restart your entire naziris. But if a person becomes a mitzayda during his naziris, it definitely does not nullify your previous days of naziris. I think I might have learned this out from the pasuk that it says that you made tumasai, that only the tumah of a mace will nullify your previous days of naziris. But being a mitzayda during your naziris for sure doesn't do that. So we see that it's not as stringent. So the Braisa continues to says, but nevertheless, I can still prove to you that the days of tzaras do not count for naziris. Amarta, you'll say, kal v'chaymeru. I have the following kal v'chaymer. If you have a situation of a person that accepted upon himself, he begins his naziros while he's by a kever, while he's in a beis hakvados. If you remember, we learned this earlier in the Masechta. A person accepts upon himself his naziros, and where is he? He's in a place of tumah. He's in the beis hakvados. So what happens then? The halacha is that the hair that he's growing now that will be part of his Naziris, and he'll cut it at the conclusion of his Naziris. Meaning it counts part of the days of his Naziris. And the halacha there is, when he leaves the Beis HaKvaris, he does have to count 7 days to be metired himself, but it counts as part of his, the hair that he has now counts as part of his Naziris. He doesn't have to nullify his entire Naziris. So if that's the din over there, when a person started his Naziris by a kever, so ein oilun loy min aminyan, those days that he was actually, that time period that he was actually in the Beis HaKvaris, does not count to be part of his Naziris, even though the regular halacha of Tumeh does not apply, that he's going to have to cut his hair and bring special karbanis for becoming Tameh. So that halacha does not apply. But the actual time period that he was Tameh does not apply, does not count towards his Naziris. So Yimei Chilutai, the days that a person is a Mitzayre, She'ein Sarir Oile Teglachas. The hair on his head right now is not going to be used for the conclusion of his Naziris, because he has to cut that hair for the conclusion of his tzaras, and then he's going to have to cut his hair again for the conclusion of his naziris. So it's not oile teglachas naziris. Le'kol shekei, most definitely that the days of being a mitzayre should not count towards your naziris. So therefore from this we see this Kal V'Chaim teaches me that the days of tzaras during naziris does not count towards your naziris. Braisa continues and says, "Ve'enli elo yemei chalutay." So we learned out of here regarding a mitzayda that was confirmed to be a mitzayda. Yemei sifrei minayin, the days that a mitzayda counts when he's metired himself. What happens with this mitzayda? Mitzayda comes in from the machna, cuts his hair once and brings karbanis, and then he has to count 7 days, and then he has to cut his hair again and bring karbanis again. So those days, Yemei sifrei, that he counts 7 days, do they count towards his naziris or not? So the Braisa again says, Vidinu, I could learn this out. It's logical to compare this to the days that he's confirmed as a mitzayda. Those days don't count. So the days that he counts when he's metired himself from his tzaras also won't count. Because ma yemei chalutai, just like in the time period when he's confirmed to be a mitzayda, what happens now? Ton teglachas, he has to cut his hair for that when he comes into the machna. Af yemei sifrei, the same is with a person that's counting. Those 7 days that he counts, when he concludes those 7 days, he has to cut his hair again. So we see that they're similar. And just like we learned out that the days that he's confirmed to be a Nazir, a Mitzayda rather, it does not count as part of his Nazirus. Af yemei sifrei, the days that he's counting, the 7 days that he counts until when he cuts his hair the second time, also don't count. Now the Braisa continues, Yochel, if so, maybe take this a step further. Maybe the same halacha should apply to the days of a mitzayre when he's not yet confirmed to be a mitzayre, when he's locked up and he's sort of quarantined, and the kohen has to then assess to see if he is a confirmed mitzayre or not. Maybe those days when he's locked up should not count for his naziris either. And the Braisa says va'adin naisen, and I would think that logically I should compare it to a full mitzayre. Why? Because chalot, a person that's confirmed as a mitzayre, what's the halacha? Metame mishka v'meishav. He causes tumah to anything that he lies on or anything that he sits on. V'yimei es geiroi, this person, even when he's only locked up as a mitzayre and it's not yet fully confirmed, the same halacha applies. Metame mishka v'meishav. He causes tumah to whatever he lies on or sits on. So I see that their level of tumah is the same. So if we learned that from a Kal V'Chaimer for the days that a person is confirmed as a mitzayre, that those days do not count for his nazirus. So too the days that a person is being locked up, I should also say that it doesn't count towards his nazirus. But on that the Braisa says it's not so. You have to say that this is not true. Why? Because when it comes to the days that a person is confirmed as a mitzayra, so maybe carbon, when he concludes his tzaras, he has to cut his hair, he has to bring karbanas for that. So therefore it doesn't count for the days of his nazirus. Whereas a person that's just locked up as a mitzayra, and he was never confirmed to be a mitzayra, so she'ein ton taglachas, he does not have to cut his hair. Ve'enim mevi carbon, he doesn't have to bring any carbon. So lefichach yalo leminyan. So therefore, those days that he was only locked up will count towards his naziris. Mikan omru. So the Braisa concludes, and this is the halacha that we had in our Mishnah before. From here we learn out yemei sifroi v'yemei gomroi, the days of a confirmed mitzayre that he's counting when he's metired himself, or the days that he's tamei gomrei, when he's completely confirmed and tamei, he's outside the machna. those days will not be counted part of his Nazirus. Aval, Yimei Azava Azava, the days of Tumah for a person that has an emission that causes Tumah, whether Azava or Azava, male or female. Vehezgerish Mitzayda, or the days of a Mitzayda where he's locked up and he's not yet confirmed fully as a Mitzayda. Hare Elu, Oilun, those days will count for his Nazirus. Okay, that's the conclusion of this Braisa. So here, this Braisa brings you the source of this entire concept that the days of a Mitzayda will not count for the days of Nazirus. Now the question is, what is this Braisa talking about? Is this Braisa talking about a situation like Rav Chisda said? What did Rav Chisda say before? Rav Chisda said that really you could count the days of Tzaras for your Nazirus. Elamai is just a technicality. You have to have 30 days at the conclusion of your Nazirus to cut your hair. So if you don't have that 30 days, you won't be able to count your days of Tzaras. You'll have to have those 30 days afterwards. Does that fit with what it said in the Braisa? So the Gemara now will show and prove that it does not fit with what it says in the Braisa. Why not? Katani Miyes, the Braisa here says, Loi. The Braisa discusses in the beginning whether you could compare Tzaras during Nazirus to Tumas Meis during Nazirus. And the Braisa says, Loi, not necessarily could you compare it. Ima Marta b'mei Tumah, when it comes to Tumas Meis, Shekein Mevatel ben Asakaidmin. That is something which is more stringent because it totally nullifies any days you kept of your Nazirus. Whereas when it comes to a Mitzayre during his Nazirus, that it doesn't nullify all the days that you kept before. And therefore the Braisa is searching to try to figure out what's our source to say that the days of Tzaras will not count for the days of Nazirus. Says the Gemara, B'mai. What is this Braisa speaking about? If you're going to say like Rav Chisda said, that really the days of Tzaras do count for Nazirus. The only reason it doesn't count is when there's a minimal days of Nazirus, and then technically it comes out that he Pashat doesn't have the 30 days that he needs to cut his hair. If so, why is the Braisa struggling to figure out a source for this, that he's going to have to count separately now his days of Nazirus after the Tzaras? Habin and Gidel Sayar. That's simple, that he's not going to be able to include the days of his Tzaras for his Nazirus because he just needs the days for the hair growth afterwards. So the Braisa shouldn't be struggling to figure this out. This is just on a technicality. This is a fact that he has to have that amount of time. So Elalav, the fact that the Braisa is trying to figure out a source from this, what does this mean? B'nizirus meruba. We're talking about a person that has a long Nazirus. And really, as far as the growth of hair, he has enough time for the growth of hair after his Tzaras to be able to conclude his Nazirus. And still, the Braisa is trying to figure out whether the days of his Tzaras will be counted or not. V'katani, and the Braisa tells you and brings you the source, that the days of your Tzaras do not count towards your Nazirus. So Alme, from here I see loy salkin lay. The days of Tzaras never count towards your Nazirus. Not only when it's an issue, when it's a technicality, that you have the hair that has to be grown after the Nazirus. Shema Mina, so this is a conclusive raya, not like what Rav Chisda said, that always, no matter what, the days of Tzaras do not count towards your Nazirus. Okay, so the Mishnah now, we had before in this Perek, it brought there was the two Mishnayos before. One said the situations where a person becomes Tomei and it stops his whole Nazirus and he has to start his Nazirus over again. Then the Mishnah gave you a list of different kinds of Tumas where it may be a Safek or a Tumah Midarabanan, and there he will have to be Matayir himself, but it doesn't nullify his entire Nazirus and he doesn't have to bring Karbanis for that. So now based on that, the Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said, Mishum Rabbi Shua, in the name of Rabbi Shua, Kol Tumah Min HaMeis, Shenozim Begaleach Aleh. Anytime it's a level of tumah to a mace that the Nazir will have to cut his hair and bring karbanis and start his Naziris all over again, chayav and alel bias mikdash. That level of tumas mace, so if this person walks into the Beis HaMikdash while he's tamei, he will also be liable for being in the Beis HaMikdash with tumah. You chayav kadas for this, or you have to bring a carbon for this. So it has to be that level of tumah though, that the Nazir would have to cut his hair for it. The whole tumah min hameis, then the list of the different types of tumas that were mentioned before in the Mishnah, she'ena nazir megaleach halel, that will not obligate the Nazir to cut his hair and restart his Naziris again. Ein chayav alel bias mikdash. He will not be obligated or will not be liable for this, that he came into the Beis HaMikdash while he's tamei. Rav Meir argues and he says, no, lo tehezu kala min hasheretz. Those lower levels of tumah, that we mentioned before, that a Nazir does not have to cut his hair, should not be any lighter or any less than a person that becomes Tomei from a Sheretz. You're not allowed to walk into the Beis HaMikdash, not only for Tumas Meis, even if you become Tomei just from a creeping creature that causes Tumah, also the same Isser applies. So we see that walking to the Beis HaMikdash is much more stringent than the Tumah of a Nazir. By Tumah of a Nazir, it has to be a proper Tumah of a Meis in order for him to stop his whole Naziris to start over again. Walking to the Beis HaMikdash, even just becoming Tomei to a Sheretz, there's an Isser. So therefore, even if he became Tomei to a lighter Tumas Meis, he'll also be Chayiv for coming into the Beis HaMikdash.
If he comes Tomei to a lighter for Naziris,
it doesn't. He has to be Matayed himself. He has to be Matayed himself, but he's not going to have to restart his entire Naziris. That's what we learned before, right?
So that should be alright for him not to go to Beis HaMikdash. I mean, you don't have to come on to
Sheretz. He's saying this itself, that he has to be Matayed himself. Yeah, true. And Chanami. The opinion of Rav Meir needs a clarification, because basically what we learned before was that the lower level of Tumas Meis is a kind of a Tumah that either it's only a Sophic Tumah or it's only a Tumah Midirabana. Tumah Sheretz is taket not Tumas Meis, but it's a definite Tumah. But the Tumas Meis we spoke about before was only a Sophic Tumah or Tumah Midirabana. So why should he be Chayiv for that if you walk into the Beis HaMikdash? What Rabbi Eliezer is saying makes a lot of sense. Okay, so it needs a clarification. Okay, the Gemara does not actually discuss any content of what it says here in the Mishnah to explain it, but the Gemara will only focus on one detail here, very interesting. Rabbi Eliezer said this in the name of Rabbi Shua. So the Gemara asks, is it true that he said it in the name of Rabbi Shua? Sagt the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum Rabbi Shua Gamarlo. Did Rabbi Eliezer say this in the name of Rabbi Shua? Vaha Mishum Rabbi Shua Bar Mamel Gamarlo. We know that he said it in the name of a different Rabbi Shua, in the name of Rabbi Shua Bar Mamel. So the Rosh over here says, who's the other Rabbi Shua? The other Rabbi Shua is Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. So the Gemara is asking, did he say it in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Chananya or in the name of Rabbi Shua Bar Mamel? And it brings a brayse to prove that he really said it in the name of Rabbi Shua Bar Mamel. The Tanya, we learned in a brayse that Omer Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said, when I went to this place, Ardaskia, Rabbi Shua ben Pesareish. I found Rabbi Shua. This is yet a third Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua, his father's name was Pesareish. Interesting name. So I found him that he was sitting and teaching a halacha in front of Rabbi Meir. And which halacha was he teaching? This halacha that we just had here in the Mishnah. That called anytime it's a level of tumah that the Nazir has to cut his hair for it, he's also liable for coming into the Beis HaMikdash while it's tumah. If it's a level of tumah that the Nazir does not have to cut his hair for it, you're not liable for walking into the Beis HaMikdash b'tumah. Now Amaloi, so Rab Meir responded, like we had the opinion of Rab Meir in our Mishnah, no, it's not true. Al tehezu kala misheretz. This lower level of Tumas Meis is not any lighter than the Tumah of Sheretz, which is still chayiv for walking into the Beis HaMikdash. Amar tiloi. So I said to him, Rabbi Eliezer says, I said to him, Klum atabaki b'Rabbi Shua bar Mamel. Are you baki? Are you proficient in what Rabbi Shua bar Mamel taught? Amalihain. So he said, yes. Kach amali Rabbi Shua bar Mamel mishum Rabbi Shua. This is what Rabbi Shua bar Mamel taught in the name of Rabbi Shua. Kol tuma min ameis shahan nazir migaleh chalel. Anytime you have the tumah of a maze that the Nazir cuts is here for this, chayiv alem mishum beis mikdash. You chayiv for going into the Beis HaMikdash. V'chol tumah min ameis she'ein nazir migaleh chalel. Ein chayav alem mishum beis mikdash. So what do you see over here? In this is the brayse. It's not here. You see in the brayse havei. So you have here Mishum Rabbi Shua bar Mamel Gamila, that the source of where this comes from is not from Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, but it comes from Rabbi Shua bar Mamel. So why in our Mishnah does it say that Rabbi Eliezer said this in the name of Rabbi Shua? So Amru. So now, based on this, the Gemara said they answered Shmami no. From here we see Kol Shmaitase the Misamre Beveit Losa. Anytime you have a statement that Tanaim taught, and there were 3 Tanaim that this came from. In other words, it was the last Tana that heard it from one before, and he heard it from one before. Kadmayu Basroi Amrinan. The first one that said the statement and the last one that said it are mentioned, Mitziai Loi Amrinan. But the one that's in the middle is not mentioned. So over here, when it says in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer said in the name of Rabbi Shua was the one that originally said this halacha. The one in the middle, which was Rabbi Shua bar Mamel, he was actually the one that Rabbi Eliezer heard it from, but the one that's in the middle is not mentioned. The Gemara brings another example for this. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Af Anan Nami Tanina. We find this also in a different Mishnah in Peyah. There as well, it skips out the people that are in the middle. Amar Nacham Alavla. Nacham Alavla said about the halacha that's about to be mentioned here. Kach mekublanim im Rab Miyasha. This is what I learned from Rab Miyasha. Shekibul mi Abba, that heard it from my father. Shekibul min azugais, that heard it from the zugais, which are mentioned in Pirkei Avos. The zugais refers to the zugais there. Yosef ben Yezer, Yosef ben Yechanan, or Shmai and Naftali. There's different zugais that are mentioned there. He heard it from those peers. Shekiblu min hanaviyim, and they received it from the Nevi'im, and that it's a halacha l'Moshe misinai. That's the way it traces it back from where it was heard. And which halacha is this? B'zireya sheves v'chardal, person that plants dill and mustard in one field, b'shnayim v'shloishim mekaymis, in 2 and 3 different places in the field. Shenaisim peya mikol echad v'echad. Even though it's in one field, but because it's different things, it's mustard and dill, so he has to give peya separately from each one of them. Okay, that actually the Rosh points out that the Gemara is combining here 2 different Mishnahs of Peyah. It's not clear why the Gemara is doing so, but the Gemara does it. The Gemara combines different Mishnahs. But what does the Gemara point out here? The ilu Yeshua v'kalev like a chashiv. Yeshua that heard the halacha from Moshe, right? Moshe, he's saying halacha Moshe misinai. Who was the first one that heard it from Moshe Rabbeinu? Yeshua, and then from Yeshua went together with Kalev as well. That's not mentioned. So Shema Mina, from here we see that even though it's tracing back different people that they said this halacha, but in between, Shua and Kalev are skipped out. So too over here in our Mishnah, it's telling you Rabbi Eliezer heard it from Rabbi Yeshua bar Mamel, he heard it from Rabbi Yeshua, even though he never heard it from Rabbi Yeshua, he heard it from Rabbi Yeshua bar Mamel, but it skips out the middle person.